Hi, my name's Mariel. They told me my father left on deployment and that my mother died of illness. But none of that was true. Instead, I was raised by an aunt who locked the fridge, took my name, and tried to erase every piece of love I had left. She told everyone I was broken. She made the world believe it. But what if the one who raised me wasn't just cruel, but hiding something far darker? Why was I the only one left out of my mother's will? And why did her voice reappear years after she was gone? Would you still call it family? If they built your home out of lies? The rain hadn't stopped all afternoon. I watched it trail down the window in quiet streams, each drop blurring the last glimpse I had of normal. Our little house in Klamath Falls was always so silent in autumn, like it was holding its breath for something colder. I sat at the edge of the bed, my legs too short to reach the floor, hugging my dad's military duffel bag so tightly I could feel the seams pressing into my arms. "Hey, kiddo," Dad said, kneeling down so our eyes met. His uniform still smelled like the old truck we used to take to the lake, part oil, part pine, part something that always reminded me of him. "It's just until I'm back from deployment, sweetheart. Aunt Vera will take care of you." I nodded because I was supposed to, because he needed me to, because I thought deep down he would always come back. I didn't know that moment would be the last time I saw him with light in his eyes. When he hugged me, his arms felt different, not weaker, not tighter, just final. And I didn't know how to name that kind of hug at 11. I just knew it felt like something was ending. Aunt Vera stood in the doorway, holding her purse like she was ready to leave the moment he was done talking. She gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Come on, Mariel. We have a lot to organize." She called it temporary. Dad said it would only be for a while, but that was the first lie of many. The first few days were quiet. She didn't ask me about school or if I missed Dad. She didn't tuck me in or check if I liked the cereal. There were no good nights, no good mornings, just instructions, rules, lists on the fridge that told me what to clean and when. By the end of the first week, she'd taken my bedroom door off the hinges. "Privacy is a privilege," she said flatly when I asked why. One morning, I tried calling Dad. I waited until she left for work and used the old rotary phone she kept in the laundry room, thinking maybe, just maybe, he'd answer. The line rang once, twice, then silence. I tried again the next day, and the next, until the number stopped working altogether. I left letters on the kitchen table, asking her to mail them. I watched the mailbox for something, anything, in return, but nothing came. One night, I peeked inside her closet while she was in the shower. My letters were there, unopened, in a neat little pile like they were part of some cruel collection. That's when the fear began to sprout quietly beneath everything else. I started noticing her smiles disappeared when she talked to neighbors, how her voice changed on the phone, how she locked her bedroom door at night like I was the danger. She introduced house rules. Not chores, not suggestions, rules. Written in red pen and posted on the fridge like commandments. No speaking unless spoken to. No food after 6 p.m. No calls unless approved. I began writing in my journal again, carefully, under the blanket with a flashlight. My only voice, my only proof that I still existed. Some nights, I wrote like I was talking to Dad. Others, I just scribbled to feel the page give beneath my pen. "If you could see me now, would you still call this home? Maybe I'm being dramatic," I wrote once. "Maybe she's just strict. Maybe this is just what grown-ups do when they're scared too." But I didn't believe myself. Then one night I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The fridge was padlocked. I stared at it, unsure if I was dreaming. Vera stood behind me, her arms crossed. "Earn your meals with obedience," she said plainly, like it made perfect sense. I turned slowly and walked back to my room. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just sat on my bed, clutching the metal dog tag Dad had left with me. The only thing I had left of him that felt solid. And I realized I wasn't scared because I was hungry. I was scared because I didn't know what would come next. The rain hadn't let up. It had been 2 days since my father's boots last touched the porch. I kept thinking I'd hear the hum of his truck pulling back into the driveway, that maybe he forgot something, maybe he changed his mind, but the only thing I heard that night was the harsh clank of metal, the sound of a latch snapping shut. I sat up in bed, my heart already thudding. From the hallway, Vera's voice filtered through in clipped, cruel tones. "She's not going anywhere," she hissed into the phone. I crept to the door, careful not to make the floor creak. The fridge. She had locked the fridge. I didn't even know that was possible. A thick chain was wrapped around the handles, secured with a padlock. My stomach rumbled. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and even that had only been a single slice of toast. The next morning, Vera handed me a printed list, 10 rules neatly typed. They were absurd. No doors locked. Ask permission to eat. No outside communication without approval. Bed by 8 p.m. sharp. No TV unless supervised. Speak only when spoken to. Complete chores before school. No visits to neighbors. Mail will be checked before sending. Disobedience equals consequences. I read them 3 times, but the words never made more sense. These weren't rules meant to protect a child. They were rules meant to break one. At school, I sat alone at lunch. My field trip slip hadn't been signed again. When Mrs. Carter, my teacher, knelt beside my desk and asked if everything was okay at home, I nodded. The lie felt heavy in my throat, like chalk dust. Vera was already waiting in the car when school let out. Her fingers wrapped around my shoulder the moment I got in, tight, like a clamp, too tight. She didn't say a word the whole ride home. I started hiding my journal behind the insulation in the wall vent. It was the only place she hadn't checked, yet. Things only got worse from there. Vera told Mrs. Lanson next door that I was emotionally volatile and possibly mentally unstable. I overheard her say it while trimming hedges one afternoon. At church, she whispered in prayer circles that I was grieving, that she was doing her best to care for me out of the goodness of her heart. People began looking at me differently, not with concern, but with suspicion, or worse, pity. No one asked me anything directly. Maybe they thought Vera had it under control, or maybe they just didn't want to get involved. I tried to write my dad again. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it into an envelope, but when I went to get the mailbox key from the hook in the laundry room, it was gone. So I drew instead. A picture of me and my dad standing outside the house, our hands joined like puzzle pieces. I taped it under my bed. Every night I'd lie on my stomach, reach under, and run my fingers over the crayon lines. 9 days since he left. What if he did forget me? Vera didn't say a word on my birthday. No card, no cake, no smile. Just a reminder to mop the floor before dinner. Later I found a card hidden inside the pantry behind the flour bin. My father's handwriting. It was addressed to me. She'd taken it. She kept it from me. I didn't cry. I refused to give her that. Instead, I traced the envelope's edge with my finger and whispered the words I imagined were inside. After school one day, I snuck into the library and tried calling the military base. The school had a landline in the back office behind the circulation desk. I waited until Mrs. Green stepped away and dialed fast. But before I could even ask for my dad, the librarian caught me. "You can't use this phone," she scolded. "It's for staff only." I walked home in silence, my throat tight. That night, Vera handed me 1 slice of toast for dinner. "One," she said flatly. "Because children who sneak around don't deserve more." I didn't respond, I just stared at the plate. The toast was dry. I left it untouched. Later, under the safety of my blanket, I whispered into the darkness, "I'm going to remember every single thing." The memory that would haunt me most hadn't even happened yet. The scent of bacon wafted through the house, thick and taunting. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, today would be different. But I stayed in bed longer than I should have, knowing deep down the sizzling smell wasn't meant for me. Downstairs, I could hear Vera laughing, the clink of plates, the scrape of chairs. Church ladies. Again. I tiptoed to the hallway and peeked through the banister. Vera had her hair curled tight, her best cardigan on. Her voice rang out in that sweetened, syrupy tone she used only for guests. I saw a tray of pancakes, eggs, fresh orange juice. I backed away, the smell now a cruel joke. That Sunday scent, bacon, pancakes, butter, used to be mine. Dad made breakfast every weekend like it was a sacred ritual. He'd flip pancakes in funny shapes, always saving the first for me. He said it was his practice pancake, but it always tasted the best. I shut my bedroom door and leaned against it. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. I walked over to the corner where I kept the small box of memories, pictures, notes, drawings. Except it wasn't there. The box. I searched under the bed, in the closet. Panic rose in my throat. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Empty. I stormed down the stairs, past the women with their coffee and chatter. Vera's eyes caught mine. "Go back upstairs," she said with a painted smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What did you do with my pictures?" I asked, my voice louder than I meant. She stood up slowly, placed her cup down. "Those weren't healthy for you. You need to move on." "They were mine." Her friends turned away, uncomfortable. Vera's voice dropped low and cold. "I told you, go upstairs." I wanted to scream, but I turned and walked back, each step heavier than the last. That night, I held my pillow tight and tried to remember the last night I spent with Dad. He sat on the floor with me, our backs against the bed, braiding my hair slowly like he always did when I couldn't sleep. His hands were rough from field work, but he was gentle. "I'll call every week," he'd promised. "You write in your journal and I'll write in mine." He'd handed me a brown leather-bound notebook. Inside, the first page read, "Never let anyone rewrite your story for you." His handwriting, so sure, so strong. I reached for the journal where I usually kept it, under my mattress. But it was gone. Gone. I tore the bed apart. My hands shook. I even checked behind the dresser, the closet, the bathroom. Nothing. The next day after school, walking back home, I saw Mrs. Jenkins watering her roses. She waved. I waved back. And that's when I saw it. Her phone, resting on the porch rail. Heart pounding, I veered off the sidewalk and climbed the steps quickly. Knocked once on the door. No answer. She was humming, out back. I snatched the phone and dialed the number I'd memorized since I was 5, Dad's unit. U.S. MO Army Personnel Services. How may I direct your call? "I need to speak with Sergeant Ramos," I said, barely breathing. Silence. Then typing. Then more silence. "I'm sorry," the voice said. "There's no one by that name listed currently." I froze. "But he's deployed. He just left. Maybe it's a mistake." "Miss, we have no record of that individual on active deployment. Is there something else I can help you with?" I hung up. My legs felt weak. I put the phone back and walked the rest of the way home in a fog. Vera was waiting by the door. "You were gone too long," she said, voice tight. I opened my mouth, but her hand came fast. The sound was louder than the pain at first. A high-pitched ring filled my ears. Then the sting came, followed by heat. My cheek throbbed. I stumbled, hand against the wall. "Upstairs," she snapped. "You think you can sneak around?" I didn't reply. Couldn't. She grabbed my arm and shoved me toward the basement instead. The door slammed behind me, lock clicking. The dark swallowed me whole. There was no light switch. I sat on the cold concrete floor, hugging myself. My eyes adjusted slowly. In the corner, there were boxes, old holiday decorations, broken lamps, dusty books. I crawled over, needing distraction. One box read junk. I opened it. Inside were photo albums. One was labeled Deployment 2011. My breath caught. I opened the first page. My dad in uniform. Next page, an article clipped from a local paper. Sergeant Anthony Ramos discharged from duty following medical evaluation. Discharged? Before he even left. I flipped through frantically. Photos, articles, forms, all dated months before he supposedly left me. He didn't leave on deployment. He never left. Tears ran down my face, hot and confusing. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. I pressed myself against the wall, peering through the tiny slit at the bottom of the door. A shadow passed. Then I heard Vera's voice. She's starting to ask too many questions. The morning after the basement, the air in the house felt different, thicker. like it was trying to choke me before I even said a word. I walked into the kitchen where Vera stood by the sink, sipping her coffee like nothing had happened, like she hadn't shoved me into the cold, cobwebbed dark just 12 hours before. "I saw the articles," I said, voice low but steady. She didn't even flinch. "Then you know the truth." "He's not who you thought he was." "That doesn't mean he didn't love me," I replied. She turned slowly, her expression hard. "Your father didn't want you. That's why he left you with me. That's why he never came back." Her words should have broken me, but something inside refused to bend. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I just looked at her, really looked, and realized for the first time that her power came from my silence. "You're not my child," she hissed, "and you never will be." It was supposed to sting. Maybe it would have months ago. But now, it only steeled me. That afternoon, we went to the grocery store. Vera never let me wander far, but I spotted a moment when she was arguing with the cashier over a coupon, and I took it. I slipped out and started walking fast. By the time I reached the bus stop, my heart was pounding, but I kept my eyes forward. And then I felt it. A hand, iron tight, on my arm. "You think you're clever?" she snapped, dragging me back toward the car. The town sheriff drove by just then. I made eye contact. He tipped his hat at her and kept going. When we got home, Vera didn't yell. Instead, she handed me a folded envelope. "This came in the mail," she said flatly. I opened it and froze. It was a document, legal. My name, my full name, was changed. My last name was no longer Ramos. It was hers. "You don't belong to him anymore," she said. "You belong to me." That night, something in me shattered. But it wasn't weakness. It was the illusion that being quiet would save me. I walked into the living room, picked up one of her precious decorative plates, the one she always said came from her real family's legacy, and threw it against the wall. The crash echoed. Sharp. Final. She slapped me hard enough to snap my head sideways. But I didn't cry. I turned back to her and I glared. That day, I'd write later in my new journal, something cracked. But it wasn't me. Later, while she was on the phone in the other room, I went to the vent in my bedroom and pulled out the photo I had hidden. Me and my father, both in camo. He was kneeling, grinning, his arm wrapped protectively around me. I folded the picture and slid it into a letter I'd written weeks ago. Then I tucked it into the sole of my shoe. Tomorrow at school, I'd slip it to Mrs. Harlow, the guidance counselor. She always smiled at me, even when I didn't smile back. That night, I tried to close my bedroom door, but it was gone. "No privacy when you live off charity," Vera muttered, carrying the door down the hallway like it was a piece of junk. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I whispered my father's name like a prayer I wasn't sure anyone would hear. Then I saw her silhouette at the threshold. "You think you're brave now," she said. "We'll see." And I believed her, because she never made a threat she didn't intend to keep. The invitation came as a folded piece of pink cardstock, slipped into my locker like a secret. Madison from homeroom was having a birthday party, and to my surprise, I was on the guest list. For a second, I stared at the glittery balloon stickers and her curly handwriting like it was a foreign language. Parties weren't for kids like me, not anymore, not under Vera's roof. Still, I asked. At dinner, between 2 bites of plain boiled cabbage, I cleared my throat and slid the invitation across the table. She scanned it without emotion. "You want to go to this?" I nodded, barely breathing. Her lips curled slightly, as if tasting something bitter. "Fine, but only if you behave like a grateful girl. No sulking, no sarcasm, and no sweets. You'll ruin your appetite." That last part stung more than I let on. Saturday came. I wore my best dress, the one with tiny embroidered flowers my father had bought at a thrift store. Madison's house was warm, noisy, the smell of frosting and popcorn floating in the air. Kids laughed, parents mingled. For a moment I felt almost normal. Then Vera walked in. She wasn't invited. I knew that from the way Madison's mom blinked in confusion. Vera made a beeline to me, clutching her purse like it held divine judgment. "I'm just checking in," she announced loudly, eyes scanning the room. Mariel sometimes forgets how lucky she is. Laughter faltered. Conversations paused. A few kids stared. Madison handed me a paper plate with a big slice of chocolate cake. Vera plucked it from my hands with practiced grace. "That's for good girls." Humiliation burned down my neck as she turned and handed the plate back to Madison's mom. "Sugar makes her ungrateful." No one said anything. Some kids giggled, others looked away. I stood frozen, like a misplaced prop in a play I didn't audition for. I walked home. Vera had driven ahead in the car. It was dark, but I didn't care. My feet hurt, my heart more. That night, I skipped dinner, curling up with the dog tag around my neck. I wrote a letter I never sent. "Dad, would you still be proud of me?" The next morning, I didn't pray before breakfast. Vera noticed. "No blessings before eating?" she asked, slicing an apple with precision. "I'm not hungry," I replied. She narrowed her eyes. "Ungratefulness is a sin." I stood up, calmly. "If you keep trying to erase him, you'll erase me too." Her nostrils flared. "Then maybe confession will fix that mouth of yours." And just like that, daily church visits became mandatory, not for redemption, for obedience. Inside the booth, the air smelled of old wood and incense, but I didn't whisper sins. I whispered truth. I'm not ashamed of who I miss. I'm ashamed of who pretends to love me. The priest waited. I didn't kneel. I walked out. That night, Vera slammed the Bible on the kitchen table. "You've invited darkness into this house," she barked. "Evil hides in rebellion." I said nothing. Instead, I began documenting everything, her words, her rules, her punishments, in the margins of an old math workbook. If I couldn't win, I wrote, I'd at least record what losing looked like. Later, I caught her tucking something into a drawer labeled personal. The lock clicked. Her eyes flicked toward me, but she said nothing. I went to bed wondering what was inside. A letter? A photo? A piece of my father I hadn't yet lost? That night, I planned to find out. The house felt like a tomb that night, still, airless, and heavy with secrets. I waited until I could hear the deep, rasping rhythm of Vera's sleep. My heart thudded like a clock inside my chest as I crept across the wooden floor, careful to avoid the creaky plank near the doorway. Moonlight spilled in through the living room curtains, casting pale shadows across the hall. I made my way to the cabinet where I had last seen her stash the folder marked personal. The drawer wasn't locked. That alone made my pulse race. Vera never forgot to lock anything. Not the fridge, not the doors, not even the old freezer in the garage. I slid the drawer open, every inch revealing more than I was prepared to see. A collection of aging envelopes, some unopened, others neatly sliced across the top. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. Then I saw it, an envelope with my name in familiar handwriting, Dad's. I sat on the floor, legs folded beneath me, the letter trembling in my hands. The paper was soft with age, the ink faded slightly, but his voice was still there between every line. Mariel, my brave girl, I wish I could explain everything in person. The truth is, I'm not overseas. I was injured. I'm at the VA hospital in California. They discharged me with trauma, and I've been fighting to get better. For you. I left you with Vera because the court believed it was safest, but I never intended it to be forever. I've written more letters than I can count. I hope you know I never stopped loving you. The date, 6 months after the last time I saw him. That meant he had been writing all along. I swallowed hard, reading it again and again. My breath caught. Vera had told me he was deployed. She told me he left us, but here he was, pen in hand, reaching across months and miles, and she had intercepted it. She'd kept him from me. The next morning, I waited until Vera poured her coffee before sliding the letter across the table. Her eyes narrowed. I didn't speak. I simply watched her as she read. "This doesn't change anything," she said flatly. I didn't flinch. "It changes everything." She slapped the letter from the table. "You think one letter makes him a hero?" I picked it up from the floor. "It makes him more honest than you've ever been." That was the first time I saw something close to fear flicker across her face. But it vanished, replaced by venom. Before I could step back, she yanked the house phone from the wall and threw it into the sink. It crackled as the metal hit the porcelain. Then, turning on my radio, she smashed it against the counter. "You don't get to rewrite the story, Mariel." She barred me from school that week. "Until your attitude improves," she spat. So I sat in silence, tracing the lines of Dad's letter with my fingers, committing every word to memory. That night, I copied it into my journal. Then again. If I couldn't trust paper, I'd trust repetition. I hid the original in my shoe again, the same way I had with the photo. But this time, I also addressed an envelope to Mrs. Gaines, my 7th grade English teacher, the only adult I still believed might listen. I'd find a way to mail it. The night air smelled like gasoline. I looked out the window. Vera stood near the backyard fire pit, flames rising around her like some unholy altar. She held a stack of papers, tossing them in one by one. I pressed my forehead to the glass. That's when I saw it. A corner of a card, yellowed at the edge, curling in the flames. Dad's handwriting. I was sure of it. She wasn't just erasing him. She was erasing me, too. The note was folded so small it could have passed as lint. I found it in my locker, wedged between the vent and the rusting metal back wall. Just a torn piece of notebook paper, no envelope, no name. But the handwriting was unmistakable. "Meet me after school, behind the gym. Mrs. D." My knees buckled when I read it, not out of fear, but something close to hope. Mrs. Dalton had always seen me. Even when I barely raised my hand in class, she'd nod like I'd spoken. I hadn't seen her in months. Vera had pulled me from her class the moment I got too interested in writing again. That afternoon, I walked slowly past the gym, heart pounding like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. Mrs. Dalton stood in the shade of a maple tree, arms crossed, eyes scanning the yard like a soldier on recon. "You okay, kiddo?" she asked, stepping closer. I nodded too quickly. "I'm managing," I said. She glanced around, then handed me a folded envelope. "Your letter never made it to me." The post office returned it, said the sender was flagged for family court monitoring. Her voice tightened. I opened it anyway. Inside the envelope was my father's letter, the one I copied twice. Her fingers curled around mine briefly. "I believe you." That night, I hid the envelope deep in the folds of my mattress. For once, sleep came easily. I was still asleep when Vera opened my closet the next morning and found the returned envelope with Mrs. Dalton's address written on the back. The scream that came from her was less rage and more fear. "You think writing letters will fix what's broken?" she barked, waving the envelope like it was contraband. "You're trying to ruin what's left of this family." I didn't answer. I didn't flinch. That was the day her strategy changed. No more slaps. No more yelling, just cold smiles and quiet sabotage. She called the school and told them I was unstable, claimed I was having delusions, hearing voices, said I needed time off for spiritual healing. I only knew because I overheard her on the phone. "Yes, she's been receiving letters from her father," Vera said, her voice syrupy sweet. "But he's been dead for over a year. Poor thing just hasn't accepted it." The next day, I stayed home from school. Vera acted like it was normal, like I hadn't just been yanked out of my only refuge. Instead, she dressed in her finest Sunday dress and invited the church council over for dinner. They arrived with tight smiles and quiet eyes. During the meal, Vera took out the letter from my father, the real one, and read it aloud, but she twisted every word. "This man claims to be in a veterans hospital," she said, placing emphasis like she was quoting a demon. "He says he left his daughter with me for safety. But who does that sound like? Who says those things unless they're trying to lure the weak-hearted away from God's path? The room fell silent. Forks hovered midair. Only Sister May met my eyes, and even then, barely. Perhaps we should listen to what Mariel has to say, one man muttered, but no one echoed him. I asked if I could read a passage from my journal. Of course, Vera said, lips pinched. I read slowly, carefully, not naming her, not blaming her, just describing a home where truth had to hide under floorboards and love was measured in leftovers. I watched their faces. Some squirmed, some pretended to study their plates. No one spoke when I finished. After they left, I retreated to my room, my heart a bruised, beating thing, but I wasn't alone. Sister May had slipped a folded napkin into my pocket when no one was looking. Inside, in a looping hand, she'd written, "You're not the only one who's afraid. Call me if you need a witness." I sat on the edge of my bed, the napkin pressed to my lips like a prayer. Sometimes the truth needs more than one voice. The next afternoon, I returned from a walk to find the front door bolted. My key no longer fit. On the window was a taped note, written in Vera's pointed handwriting. "Stay with your demons." I pressed my hand against the glass. It was cold. I wasn't sure which demon she meant, hers or mine. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting long shadows across the porch where my life now sat in garbage bags. I stood there, the door locked tight behind me, my fingers trembling as they clutched the cold brass handle. No one answered my knock, not that I expected them to. Above the door, a sticky note fluttered in the wind like a final insult. "Stay with your demons." I reached for the nearest bag, yanking the zipper open to check for my journal. Instead, something caught the last ray of daylight. A glint of silver nestled in a sock. I pulled it out slowly, my breath hitching. It was my mother's locket. I hadn't seen it since I was a child, thought it had vanished with her scent and warmth. With shaking hands, I opened the clasp, and a soft click startled me. I hadn't realized it could hold anything more than a photograph. Then a faint voice played from within, scratchy but unmistakable. "If you ever hear this, Mariel, and Vera still has you, don't let her turn your heart cold. You are not what she says you are." I dropped to my knees on the porch. The next morning, Vera summoned what was left of the family to the church hall under the pretense of an intervention. Pastor Dwight stood at the pulpit like a judge. The pews were sparsely filled. Aunt Nadine sat tight-lipped near the back. Uncle Ray wore his sheriff's badge like a shield. Vera's voice filled the room, melodramatic and venom-laced. "She's delusional," she cried. "Writes letters to ghosts, spreads lies about the woman who took her in. I only ever tried to make her whole." "She made me smaller," I said quietly. "They didn't hear me, or maybe they chose not to." "She told strangers I hit her," Vera went on, hand to chest like a soap opera matriarch. "That I kept her locked up. This girl isn't my sister's child anymore. She's a stranger possessed by bitterness." I stood up. Every eye in the room turned toward me. "If I'm lying," I said, pulling the locket from around my neck, "then maybe you'll believe her." I pressed the clasp. The room fell silent. My mother's voice floated out. "If Vera still has you, don't let her turn your heart cold." Gasps. Murmurs. One woman crossed herself. Uncle Ray's jaw clenched. Vera lunged for the locket, but I stepped back, raising my voice. "You hit me. You locked me out. You lied to my father, to the courts, and to everyone here." Vera didn't deny it this time. She screamed. "Because you ruined her life. Your mother, she was supposed to be everything. You came along and she changed. She got sick. She became weak. I watched her fade while she clung to you." My hands shook, but I didn't let go of the locket. "She loved me. You hated that." "She heard God," Vera shouted, spit flying. "He told her you were a test, and I've spent years trying to pass it." Some family members got up and walked out, coats pulled tight, heads down. Pastor Dwight tried to calm her, but Vera wouldn't stop ranting. Her fury filled the room like smoke. Finally, he turned to me. Mariel, perhaps you should leave for your safety. I squared my shoulders. I will leave when the lies do. Aunt Nadine stood. Then I'm leaving with her. We walked out together. As we stepped into the cool evening air, Vera's voice followed us like a curse. You'll regret this, Mariel. But all I could think was, I regretted waiting so long to speak. I hadn't expected silence to feel this loud. The room above the bookstore in Asheville smelled of paper and lemon oil, the scent from downstairs wafting up through the slatted vents in the floor. The walls were bare, save for the dented metal heater that hissed during the night. A single mattress rested on the floor, no frame, just a second-hand quilt folded at the edge. I had lived there for 2 weeks. The boxes were still taped shut, not because I didn't have time, but because I couldn't bear to open them. Sometimes I stood at the window and watched people come and go from the cafe next door. They held hands, walked dogs, laughed into the cold morning air like life had never once betrayed them. I sipped tea, lukewarm and bitter, and wondered if my quiet counted as healing, or if it was just another shape of grief. Then the letter came. It arrived in a manila envelope with Aunt Nadine's careful handwriting on the front. Inside was a letter, short and warm, and a bundle wrapped in an old tea towel, photographs of my mother I'd never seen. Her laugh captured mid-tilt, arms wrapped around me as a baby, her face pressed to mine in a moment frozen in time. My throat tightened, and beneath it all, folded crisp and flat, was a document labeled Last Will and Testament of Catherine Ann Ramos. My mother had wanted Nadine to raise me, not Vera. The document was notarized, dated 2 months before my father's deployment. It named Nadine as my guardian. Vera had forged papers, filed new ones, somehow convincing a judge that she had been chosen instead. Nadine had only found this version among old files after cleaning out her late husband's desk. I pressed my fingers to the page, the ink smudged slightly from my tears. Vera hadn't just lied, she'd stolen, and not just my childhood, my mother's wishes, my father's trust, my sense of safety. I sat on the cold wooden floor for hours, rereading every line until the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the room. That night, I pulled out my journal and wrote down a memory I hadn't dared to revisit in years. It was the summer before high school. I'd received a letter in the mail, acceptance to a summer arts program at a small liberal arts college. I had screamed with joy. I remember running to show Vera, thinking, naively, that this would make her proud. She read the letter in silence. Then, with a calmness that chilled me, she tore it in half. You will not waste your life on childish vanity, she said. God has better plans for you. I didn't argue, I just folded in on myself the way I'd been taught to do. But now, years later, I felt the rage simmer in my chest like it had never cooled. Days passed, then weeks. I began sketching again, first in fragments, eyes, hands, half-finished mouths, then full forms. I joined a trauma support group for women like me, raised in religious homes where the Bible had been used more like a blade than a balm. That's where I met Ruth. She was older, kind, soft-spoken. Her voice cracked only once, when she said, "They taught us obedience was holy, but survival is too." It was Ruth who encouraged me to apply for a job teaching art at the community center. Children need to see someone who's lived through fire and still paints, she said. I got the job. The first class was small, just 5 kids. I handed out charcoal and paper, watched their little hands smudge lines across white space with abandon. I hadn't felt that free in years. That night, I wrote an email to Vera. It was 3 sentences long. I forgive you, but I will never return. I am not yours to control. I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't need one. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't a gift to the person who hurt you. It was a door you walked through alone, leaving their darkness behind. But peace, like silence, was fleeting. One morning, I opened my mailbox and found a thick white envelope with court stamps on the front. Vera was challenging my mother's will. She wasn't done. Not yet. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter like it had a pulse. I hadn't opened it yet, but I already knew what it meant. A subpoena. Vera was dragging me into court, contesting the will and suing me for defamation. After everything. I stared at it long enough for the coffee to go cold in my hands. Ruth sat across from me, her own cup untouched. "She's trying to bury you in paperwork now," she said softly. "Classic tactic. When they lose power, they reach for control." "I thought she'd finally let go," I whispered. "I thought that maybe after everything she'd be done." "She's not after justice, Mariel. She's after silence. I didn't want to fight. I wanted to be done. But walking away meant letting her version of the story stand. It meant letting her erase me again, and that I couldn't do. I found my lawyer through Ruth's network, a woman named Elise Clark, sharp-eyed and steel-voiced. She had handled dozens of emotional abuse cases, many involving forged custody arrangements, religious manipulation, and sealed truths. "She forged a document to claim custody?" Elise asked, flipping through the photocopies Aunt Nadine had mailed me. "Yes." "And then sued you for talking about it publicly?" "She says I defamed her," Elise snorted. "Let's make this public then. I want everything. Witnesses, records, letters, even the locket. We expose her, completely." I nodded, the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. "I'll have to testify, won't I?" "You'll have to speak. But this time you won't be doing it alone." The courtroom was colder than I expected. Vera sat across the aisle, hair pinned too tightly, lips drawn into a permanent sneer. Her lawyer wore a smug expression that made my stomach churn. I clutched the locket inside my pocket. Vera's side struck first, painting me as a troubled woman with abandonment issues and delusions stemming from military family trauma. I could barely recognize the version of me they described. Paranoid, emotionally erratic, dishonest. The same script I'd heard since I was 11. Then it was my turn. "I was isolated," I began, voice steady. "I was cut off from every outside connection. I wasn't just mistreated. I was rewritten." I spoke of the birthday party, the locked fridge, the ripped-up college letter, of the journal entries hidden beneath floorboards, of the photo albums labeled junk. I didn't cry. I didn't falter. I reclaimed my story. Nadine testified next, placing the original will in the judge's hands. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes glistened. "My sister wanted Mariel to live with me. Vera changed that. She never had the right." Then came Mrs. Dalton, my former teacher, who had suspected the abuse but never had enough to act. "She passed me notes," she said. "Letters I couldn't answer in time." Finally, Sister May, from the church, she confirmed Vera's manipulation, how she twisted scripture into threats. "It wasn't God she served," May whispered. "It was control," Vera snapped. "She ruined my sister's life," she screamed, lunging to grab the will from the judge's bench. "She poisoned her. She cursed us." Security had to restrain her. I just stood there watching the truth dismantle her piece by piece. The ruling came 2 weeks later. The court upheld my mother's original will. Vera lost all claims to inheritance and was issued a restraining order, no contact, no communication, permanent separation. Her countersuit was dismissed entirely. I didn't throw a party. I didn't shout with joy, but I did exhale, and in that breath I found something I hadn't felt in years: peace. As I left the courthouse, the fall air sharp and clean, a man leaned against the far end of the steps. He was older, maybe 60s, with eyes like mine. He didn't smile, just nodded. There was something in that nod, recognition maybe, or guilt. I took one step toward him before he turned and disappeared into the crowd. And suddenly I knew. He was standing by the bench outside the courthouse, posture relaxed, eyes too still. I wouldn't have noticed him if I hadn't glanced back to check the street before crossing. But there he was, like someone who'd waded through more than just a trial. At first, I thought maybe he was someone from Vera's side, come to stir up more trouble. But as I stepped past him, he spoke. Mariel rose. My feet stopped cold. That name. No one had called me that since my mother. Everyone else just said Mariel. My heart thundered as I turned slowly. He took a step forward, not too close. I'm not here to hurt you, but I have something you need to see. I backed up slightly. Who are you? Elijah. He nodded once, as if his name alone should explain everything. Your mother. She wasn't just a mother. He reached into his coat pocket, slowly, and pulled out a silver pendant. Simple but engraved with a strange symbol. My fingers instinctively flew to my neck, brushing against the small chain I wore. I'd stopped noticing it years ago. It had belonged to my mom. The one thing Vera hadn't managed to destroy. Yours has the same engraving, he said quietly. I didn't respond, just stared at the matching pendants, two pieces of a story I hadn't known was unfinished. Elijah, I repeated, testing the name. How did you know her? I worked with her intelligence division, mid-80s. We were more than just co-workers. His voice dropped, weighed down with memories. You're saying my mother was, what, a spy? She had many names. One of them was Cassandra, but the person I knew, she was brilliant, brave, and scared. I narrowed my eyes. You expect me to believe this? He reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a photo. My mother, 20-something, standing beside a man in uniform. That same military insignia was etched into the keepsake box I still kept beneath my bed. My knees weakened slightly. I thought she died in a car accident. Elijah looked away. That's what they wrote down. But sometimes deaths are too convenient. The courthouse behind me felt smaller now, less final. I swallowed hard. What do you want from me? Not want, warn. He held my gaze. If you dig further, you won't be the only one watching. There are still people who remember her, and not fondly. I took the photo from him, staring at my mother's face. So young, so fearless. It made sense, in a way. The way she used to lock every window before bed. How she always checked her rearview mirror 3 times. The cryptic stories she told me as a child, always masked as fairy tales about wolves and hidden kingdoms. Why now? I asked, voice low. Why wait until after Vera, after the trial, after everything? Because Vera wasn't the only threat, he said. I waited until I knew you were ready to listen. I studied him. The tired lines around his eyes. The way he didn't reach for me or beg me to believe him. That was the only reason I didn't walk away. Back in my apartment, I spread out everything. His photo, my pendant, my journal entries, the corner of my mother's burned letter I'd salvaged from Vera's fire. Later that night, Ruth helped me cross-check the names Elijah gave. One of them matched a declassified Cold War operation I'd read about once, Operation Delphi. The rest were blacked out. I couldn't sleep. Part of me wanted to forget it all, go back to art classes, sip quiet coffee, live a simple life. But another part, the part that still clenched when someone called me Mariel Rose, needed to know, needed to finish what someone else had started. Elijah met me again the next day, handing me a second photo, this one older, blurred. My mother with a child that looked eerily like me, but it wasn't me. Who is this? He hesitated. I was hoping you could tell me. That night, I sat by the mirror, turning my mother's pendant in my hand. The engraving caught the light, one of those things you only notice when looking too closely. You'll attract people who don't forgive, Elijah had warned. I looked at my reflection and whispered, maybe it's time they remember me. I found the ledger hidden at the very back of a metal cabinet in Vera's old study, a black site ledger, compressed with code and names I barely recognized. It was locked in a vault behind layers of her legal paperwork. Now, its secrets were mine. As I flipped through the faded pages, one entry made the walls spin. A covert operation coded Operation Bloodstone, dated the week of my mother's death. The time frame, the location, it matched. Alongside it, authorization signatures that read as aliases, one of them eerily close to Vera's. Elijah's voice echoed in my mind, enough to destroy her, politically, legally. Tonight, I packed my bag with what I could salvage, the ledger, encrypted intel, whistleblower testimony, proof of her direct involvement. I emailed it to a contact in the press, sent carbon copies to oversight officials, and placed a USB in a courier's binder with prepared instructions. Then came my own transformation. I wasn't just a victim back then. I donned a service uniform, matching those who served. I'd been reinstated, legally disguised as Commander Ramos. No parade, no headlines, but power anchored just beneath my collar. The event hall smelled of polished oak and whispered praises. The banner read, "Honoring Military Sacrifice." Vera stood at the podium, greetings on autopilot, unaware she was facing a reckoning. From the wings, I emerged as auxiliary staff to place refreshments. My heart hammered. When her speech began, I slipped past the lineup and into the mic stand. Clear and calm, I pressed the button. "I'm sorry to interrupt, ma'am." Beads of sweat formed on her temples. I could almost taste her dread. "This is Commander Mariel Ramos," I announced. The room tightened. Vera's eyes widened as I pressed play. The ops room recording echoed. "Commence the directive. Do not fail. The subject must disappear." She collapsed mid-sentence. Cameras whirred, flashes erupted. Someone called out, "Shut it down," but the media had already gone rolling. She was escorted away, handcuffed, speechless, unraveling. One officer leaned in and said, "Commander." My throat tightened. No Grammy, no victim. Command. A few days later, I stood by my mother's grave. Her name carved in weathered granite. I placed my insignia next to fresh flowers. I wasn't re-enlisting. This wasn't mourning. It was returning to myself. "I was never the weapon," I whispered. "I was the wound healing itself." Weeks passed. I settled in a small cabin by the sea. Morning light spilled across the floor while I taught girls self-defense. Strong, capable, survivors. Their eyes mirrored mine in bravery sculpted from survival. One afternoon, a letter slipped under my door. No return address, only a key marked Kestrel. Its ancient teeth fit into nothing I owned. I smiled, tucking it into my jacket. The coastline stretched before me, quiet, endless. This story began in silence. It ends with my voice. If there's one thing I've learned from my story, it's this. Silence may feel safe, but truth is what sets you free. For years, I believed keeping quiet was the only way to survive. But survival is not the same as living. To those watching, maybe you've lived under someone else's rules, someone else's version of your life. Maybe you've been made to feel small, voiceless, or broken. I'm here to tell you, those are lies you don't have to carry anymore. The past does not get to define you unless you hand it the pen. Reclaim your story. Speak your name out loud. Start today, even if your voice shakes. Let me ask you, have you ever held back the truth just to keep the peace? Or been told you weren't enough because someone else feared your strength? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know how this story connects with your life. If this video moved you, leave a comment with the number 1 or tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't quite hit home, I'd still like to hear why and where you're tuning in. Let's build a space where stories are bridges, not walls. And hey, if this story spoke to something in your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what's coming next. We have more journeys to walk through together. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for remembering that your voice matters. Always.